logistics is
All right, since we actually have our quorum at the beginning, we're gonna start on time today. Welcome, everybody. Call ourselves to order here. And we can start off by pointing everyone to the Dakota Land, Water, and People Acknowledgement that we have written in full on our agendas, both on paper and iPad and online. Just keep that in mind as we are doing our deliberations and any decision-making we do today. With that, we can move to approval of the agenda, which we can do by consensus. So are there any changes necessary to our agenda? Hearing none, our agenda will be approved as presented. And we'll move on to approval of our June 4th meeting minutes. And we will take a motion and second from anyone present at that meeting.
motion.
Second.
Motion from Vakisa, second from Monica. All right, and that is for approval of those as presented so far. Are there any edits necessary for those minutes? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? That motion passes and those are approved. So with that, we'll move on to our public invitation portion of the meeting for any interested people to address the commission. I understand we did have somebody register if they are present from the Sierra Club, I believe it was. Are you here?
We have two people who, both from the Sierra Club, Peter Wagenius and Joshua Hudak. So I don't see him in the audience, so.
Okay. We'll keep moving on then, maybe we'll be able to talk to them later at some point.
Cool.
Great, so we'll go to our business item, which is the O&M allocation. Rachel, go ahead. Introduce yourself and
Thank you.
you have the clicker already, that's good.
Yeah,
Yes.
clicker. That wasn't me.
Clicker.
Lucky start. Cool.
I guess let me know, is this good here? Do I need to move
That's
this?
perfect.
Okay,
It's
great.
usually fine, yeah.
Great. Well, good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Rachel Neville. I'm a budget analyst on the CDMTS Finance and Administration team. Today I'm presenting to you the annual operations and maintenance allocation for the Regional Parks and Trails System. Okay, this is an annual item, so many of you may have already seen this before, but I'll give a brief overview of what is operations and maintenance. Minnesota Statute 473351 requires that by July 15th of each year, the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission reports to Council the funding request from the implementing agencies based on the actual expenditures made in the previous calendar year. The state legislature funds a portion of the expenses necessary to run the regional parks and trail system because the system draws a significant percentage of its visits from outside the metropolitan area and the state of Minnesota. The law requires the council to review the operating expenses of each agency for eligibility on an annual basis. Also within that statute I mentioned on the previous slide is our funding formula, which is what we use to allocate the operation and maintenance appropriation to each agency. And that funding formula is 40% based on the previous year's operations and maintenance expenses, 40% based on the previous year's proportionate share of total system visits, and 20% based on the previous year's proportionate share of total acreage. Okay, so in total for state fiscal year 2027, our appropriation from the state is $11,740,000, which includes $2.54 million from the state general fund, which has been consistent year over year, and also $9.2 million in lottery in lieu of sales tax revenue, which remains consistent from last year, but which received an increase of $250,000 for this biennium. The final pass-through amounts will be based upon actual appropriations and revenues received. And what that last little bullet is saying is that, or just waiting to get the actual appropriation amounts instead of these estimates for, we're waiting to get the receipts to actually approve these appropriation amounts, but there have generally not been changes in recent years since getting those receipts. Okay, On this slide, you'll see our actual appropriations for each implementing agency as well as the total for the actual operations and maintenance expenses, as well as the appropriation I mentioned in the previous slide. As you can see, our total actual 2025 operation and maintenance expenses are around $152 million, where the appropriated amount is only $11,740,000. This is around 7.7% of the Regional Parks and Trails total operations as maintenance expenditures, despite the statute I mentioned previously, maintaining that the parks should receive no less than 40% of their annual operations and maintenance expenditures. This has remained pretty consistent from prior years, which range from having around 7.5% to 10% of that actual operations and maintenance expenditures in the actual appropriation. This is an increase for the actual operations and maintenance expenses. This is an increase from the prior year of about 8 million. Last year, our total operations and maintenance expenses for the park system was around 8,200,000. So that's about a 5.7% increase year over year for the actual expenses. Okay, that brings us to our action item today. Our recommended action is that the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission reports to the Metropolitan Council the Regional Parks and Trails System State Fiscal Year 2027 Operations and Maintenance Funding Requests. Are there any questions?
All right, commissioners. Or Wendy.
I'm gonna do my usual funding rant for the people who are, we've got a couple commissioners who are new, and it actually used to be a higher percentage back in the early 2000s. It got up as high as 16 or 17%. Still not anywhere near where it's supposed to be, but this is not normal. This is dropping, and you know, when they got down to 10, I thought, well, it can't really get any worse than that, can it? Well, obviously, it can get worse than that. The legislature is not doing their job with regards to the funding of the regional park system, which then makes it fall on the backs of the property taxpayers in the communities that are hosting these parks. Just an editorial comment.
In response to that, Minneapolis has lost a significant amount of tax revenue. What would be the projected, does anyone, have any projected numbers on what this would look like if this trend continues to happen?
In terms of like what the amounts the implementing agencies would have to raise their tax rates to?
Each one, correct. Because I do know that Minneapolis lost a significant amount of Fortune 500, 100 companies, one. And then the population has shrunk, people have moved left. And so they have had to raise taxes to compensate for that. So if you take that trend and you take this trend, to Wendy's point, how would we be able to go to the legislator and say, hey, by the way, do you see these numbers, right? And if you don't do something, then we might be in a worse shape than anything else.
I don't know that we've ever seen anything on a like per tax basis. And while you have access to the numbers, I'll defer to staff to decide whether it's their job to calculate that or to ask the implementing agencies. But I imagine certainly somebody could get us that if they want, and they probably do some of that kind of lobbying on their own. But just for the amount number, I am kind of curious where that has been on the Met Council's lobbying priority list. I'm just doing some rough math here, and even with the accounting for the increase in the actual expenses, it seems like we're going down on the percentage even if it hadn't gone up, I think. So while it's within the range that we've seen in recent years, it is even on the low end of that range before even accounting for longer than that. So it hasn't been like a straight line trend, but it's definitely going the wrong direction in the greater picture. And yeah, what do we do about that?
Chair and Commissioners, I don't know that I have an answer around what we do with it, but I can tell you, when the regional park agencies get together at the beginning of every legislative session, they prioritize increased operations and maintenance funding every time. And it has been a slog, but and this is the first year we've ever had more than $150 million in operating expenses. Like, we've crested that number, and the amount that's appropriated by the legislature in general fund and then lottery and new taxes is not keeping up. The last couple years, we've gotten small bumps. As Rachel said, there was a $250,000 increase, which is something, and we are grateful, but it isn't enough. But this is hard funding to get. I don't want to say property in lieu of taxes, but the in lieu of property taxes money is that's really competitive funding that's split up between the Department of Natural Resources, the zoo, and a number of others, and everybody is sort of positioning to get more, and it hasn't happened. So this is a big issue. I mean, people know that if you don't maintain your parks and trails, they won't be that desirable to go to. So it's a big issue. We need to.
Do you know which bill this typically ends up in?
I can't remember.
She does. Right. It's like, which committee does that go through and under what kind of heading?
Thanks, Lisa.
Mr. Chair, committee members, Lisa Barajas, Executive Director of the Community Development Division. This typically goes through the environment bill. It'll show up in that if they do an omnibus in the bill that would cover parks, trails, it'll get DNR, other natural resources trust fund, other kind of legacy, all of those things get all together in that one single bill, sometimes called environment omnibus, but different legislatures call it different things.
Okay. Environment, not like state operations or any of those kinds of things. That's good to know.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
the council doesn't get to choose that much what it lobbies on. The governor decides that sort of stuff.
Oh.
So it can't come from the council, it would have to come from the implementing agencies. But I'm just pointing out that we supposedly value our parks, but we're not on this particular funding thing. And when you look at visitation, we have far more visitors than the state park system does, but far less funding. And so it is falling disproportionately on property taxpayers.
I now realize that part. I would have thought that the council itself maybe put together a legislative agenda, but maybe it's not.
Well, they do, but it's subject to the governor's approval.
Okay.
We're not independent.
Well, it's a question of like, is it a mild suggestion or a suggestion that's usually actually listened to, and there's a range of those, so.
And it depends on the governor.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Chair,
Yes.
I probably have a question that perhaps Lisa can answer, but is that part of is that omnibus bill typically the budget bill? So it would be this year's the biennial budget coming up, so this would be the year that parameters are set? Is that how it works?
Mr. Chair, commissioners, yeah. So it is part of the governor's budget. Supplemental budget requests happen in the second year of the biennium, and for these types of receipts that we get annually, then it shows up every year, not just on especially if there are changes. So it doesn't always come through only in the first year of the biennium when they do the budget bill. Ultimately, it ends up in the budget bill through the environment committees. But yes, that's typically how it happens. But some of these, like Rachel was referencing, when we get the receipts, then we really know what we get. For the most part, we get what is appropriated, or what is suggested in the appropriation. But there have been times where we, like in COVID in 2020, where we had a quick drawback because we weren't sure what was going to happen that particular year.
We say the same thing with the legacy funds, because those also come from sales tax, so it all depends on what sales revenues are. So those vary a bit on an annual basis rather than just the biennium. So we see a little of all.
So
The
Kira,
parameters are typically set
Right.
in the biennium. So if they were gonna change a funding allocation, it would be, the opportunity would be in next year's budget. Otherwise, you're just working with receipts of those funds.
Yeah, largely, although they've been less stringent about that, like strictly just budget here, strictly just bonding there kind of separation that they sort of traditionally had. So like most of the budgeting happens, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's off the table in the off years either. That they have to do it one year, they still can do stuff the other. Keezy, you had something?
yeah, so I was gonna ask, is it applicable or appropriate, probably that's a better word, being the new, well, no longer the newbie, maybe. Somebody else newer than I am, so. But still having the tag on me, right? The new person tag. Could we get some information on the I mean, when I say information, bulleted, just, it would be good for us to start having these conversations in our communities, right? With our legislative people and say, you know, hey, by the way, are you aware of this? And of course, they're gonna say, well, aware of what? And what's the trend? And they're gonna ask the data and all those different things. But at least the conversation would be started. I would hate to get it down to 1% and then we start having a conversation, right? We better suit ourselves to have it at 10% and try to increase it, you know, incrementally. So.
And we've seen some like graphs of that trend line over time and things like that too, that we could get updated and give to some of our newer people.
I hope I just
We have a
assigned
required
someone a bunch of
report.
work, that's all.
I was gonna ask the same question, because there's really no historical information in this background information.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I actually have like one printout if you wanted to see it. I don't know if that's
We can fight over
appropriate.
it.
If somebody wants to fight over it. It does not include, this past, or this current fiscal year, the 2027, but that's the previous 16 years. So.
And Mr. Chair, we do have charts because we do share them on a regular basis, both with the governor's office when we put in our annual requests, as well as in past presentations, so it's easy for us to pull up. I'm sure Emma can share after the meeting.
Yes, sir.
It's, Chair Commissioners, it's also appropriate if you wanted to meet with your park agencies to just learn a little bit about what their thinking is and what their concerns are around operations and maintenance, because they can talk straighter about this than we probably can. We do produce a report every other year for the legislative library that is on this operations and maintenance, and it's basically just goes over what Rachel just provided to you, which is a summary of the costs, but it is interesting because what Councilmember Wolf said, you know, it does play out where we've had times when we've gotten a much larger percentage share of our operating expenditures, but exceeding $150 million, you know, it's not headed in the right direction at this point.
Is there a similar kind of O&M appropriation for the greater Minnesota regional parks?
No.
Okay.
Well, that would be the state park system.
Well, there is also a somewhat new-ish in the last 20 years, regional designation for things outside of the metro area that are not the state park system. The legacy fund kind of drove that. There was an establishment of a commission for that and going through and deciding which things would deserve that designation. So they do get some other pots of money and some similar policy things. And there's a coordination for legacy purposes between that group and Met Council and DNR. But they don't have all of the same things that we do, but there's some crossover.
They're not a state agency,
Right. Yeah, they're,
commission, a nonprofit or something. The Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission, yeah.
Yeah.
it's defined as a nonprofit.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It's been, and functionally, the regional park system is on par with the state park system in terms of its function. So it's not as directly comparable to that regional park system for Greater Minnesota as it is to the state park system, just very different funding.
Different scale, different visitorship, for sure, that kind of thing. Just to review what our role on this item is, we are required to send a report to the Met Council, so we don't have anything really to like approve in terms of what the funding is. We just say, do we believe that her numbers are real and that we are ready to present this as is up to Wendy's colleagues.
Where I will make the same rant.
Send a note say, oh yeah, we believe they are real according to you, and they need a whole bunch if you just look at the numbers. I mean, I have said every year since I've been here, operations maintenance is why the park works. We can build new parks every year and they fall every 6 months. It's mind blowing for me that nobody actually increased the budget of operation maintenance. But I mean, as a household, I know nobody wants to clean the kitchen.
So if there aren't any further questions for Rachel, we could take a motion to send that along.
I'll get a motion to send it
Okay, so we have a motion from
with
Monica.
angry eyes.
There's a second from Makiza, which is that the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission reports to the Metropolitan Council the Regional Parks and Trail System State Fiscal Year 2027 Operations and Maintenance Funding Requests as outlined in this. Any discussion on that as a motion? Okay. All in favor of that, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Okay, that is approved. Thank you for your report. That should bring us on to our information items unless there's something else. Okay. Starting with our system annual use estimate. Come on up. Let us know about that.
Chair, council member, commissioners, thanks for having me here. My name is Ismael Ramirez and I'm the Parks and Trails Principal Researcher. And I'm here to present the 2025 annual use estimates for the region. Just as a quick background, we've been producing the annual use estimate since 1995. And the annual use estimates is used to calculate each implementing agency's share of regional parks and trails grant program dollars. It also allows to monitor trends over time. And it's one of two responsibilities that this position has. The other one being the park visitor study that is conducted every 5 years. And this year, we're actually conducting a park visitor study, the 2026 park visitor study. What are the goals of the annual use estimate? The annual use estimate, it's mainly to inform operations and maintenance funding allocations among the park agencies. It also measures annual visits to the regional parks and trails, and they can also help us track trends over time at a regional and at agency level. Unfortunately, the annual use estimates are only statistical estimates, and they're not precise counts based on summer sampling. They're also not statistically valid at the unit, or in this case, park and trail levels. The annual use estimates, the 2025 annual use estimates include data from 139 units. This includes regional parks, regional trails, parks, reserves, and special recreation features. And this is the fifth and last year of multipliers from the 2021 visitor study. And as I mentioned, we're doing a visitor study this year, so we will have new multipliers for the 2026 annual use estimates. And this is just one way to, visitation is one way to demonstrate the value of regional parks and trail systems. Others include climate mitigation and public health benefits, among others, climate resilience, carbon capture, wildlife, and also plant life protections. How do we go about calculating the annual use estimates? And this is truly an example of interagency collaboration. The process begins with counts conducted by the regional park implementing agency staff at parks and trails across all the metro area. Staff count pedestrians, bicyclists, vehicles, buses, boats, and horses entering the park or trail. Counts are scheduled by council staff between the Saturday before Memorial Day and Labor Day, which is approximately over 99 days, and now randomized across dates and times, just to account for everything. In 2025, the council coordinated over 2,000 of these counts. To reduce the impact of weather, construction, or other anomalies, we combined the previous 3 years of data with a 4th year, and then we use this 4-year data set to then to be scaled using funding formulas that account for people per vehicle, unaccounted days and times, and also entrances with similar use. And finally, we also gather data on special events and camping that fall all throughout the year, and then that is incorporated to the final use estimates. This year, we had, last year, 2025, we had an estimated 69.1 million visits that were made in the regional parks and trails. This is a recovery from last year, as last year we saw a little bit of a bump down. And this is most of the agencies experience a recovery in visitation. Something that I want to point out is that trail use increased significantly, and it's mainly driven by the addition of new units. There was also investments, and also we're starting to see interagency trail connections that allows residents to transition from one agency to another one, and this has been the case especially in Dakota County. So why did visitation increase? This is the variation is very typical in sample counts. Some agencies go up, some agencies go down. There were new units added to the system, and also we had nice weather patterns in 2025 that allowed for people to go out and visit their parks and trails. The visits per agency, Minneapolis Park and Board was the agency that had the most visitors out of the 10 implementing agencies, with 26.4 million visit, and also followed by Three Rivers Park District with 14.7, and then the city of St. Paul with 7.6. The city of Bloomington, Washington County showed the largest increase in visitation, both over 300,000, more than the previous year. And this also is explained by the addition of new units, especially in the city of Bloomington. The most visited parks in the system, again, this is not a surprise, is Minneapolis Chain of Lakes Regional Park, followed by Mississippi Gorge Regional Park with 3.7 million, and also Central Mississippi Riverfront Regional Park with 3.5 million. And for the most visited trails in the system, Minnehaha Parkway Regional Trail with 3.1, followed by Midtown Greenway Regional Trail, which is a new addition to the system. And in third place is Lake Links Regional Trail. As I mentioned before, this year we're doing the 2026 Park Visitor Study, and the purpose of this Park Visitor Study is to inform planning, policy, and management for the implementing agencies. We also evaluate and we aim to strengthen equitable use of regional parks and trails in accordance to Imagine 2050 and the Parks and Trails Policy Plan. And also we are updating the funding formulas this year for this year count. Where we are right now is currently we're collecting data in the field. This is going to go all the way until September, the second week of September. Then we're going to have some focus groups happening during fall. This is aimed for underrepresented communities that perhaps their voice was not heard in the Park Visitor Study. And so we're going to hold 10 focus groups. And then we're going to analyze the data. We're going to engage the implementing agencies. We're going to update the multipliers. So this is going to happen during late fall or early winter. And we will be completing a publication by spring 2027. So last year's AMPOSC commission, we explored two questions. And this is something that I've been exploring over the past year. One of the questions was if estimates can be statistically significant or accurate at the unit level. And the other question was how accurate are winter visitation estimates. And I've been digging into the data, I've been collecting information, and I'm happy to bring some information to this meeting. So first of all, I want to specifically address what is statistically significant. Statistical significance is data with 95% confidence interval and less than 10% margin of error. This means that we are 95% confident that the true number of visitors falls between, or 95% confident, that falls between within the 10% of our estimate. For example, if we estimate 1,000 visitors, the real number is very likely between 900 and 1,100. This is made by measuring the entrances. If we want a statistical significant information for the region, we will need to put most likely sensors in entrances. In 2026, there were a total of 1,822 reported entrances in the region. And to get a statistically significant information for each unit, we will need to install 1,321 approximate, which will cover approximately 70 to 72 of the entrances. And these are sensors that need to keep track of everything we're tracking, such as pedestrians, skaters, bikes, scooters, horses, cars, buses, and boats. The best sensor that I was able to find that allowed for tracking all this was approximately $6,000 per sensor. So some benefits and drawbacks is that yes, there's clear benefits. They're always accurate. They're automatic counts. They can recognize pedestrians, everything. They will absolutely provide significant results. That is also something the Met Council will not schedule counts anymore. And also there will be no seasonal multipliers. However, the drawbacks are somewhat significant. The upfront cost will be approximately $8 million. And these sensors, each sensor we have to pay $750 a year subscription, which will amount approximately $950 a year that they will have to be paid every year. Unfortunately, if we change the methodology, we will not be able to compare or relate to past years. Another thing is that there will be perhaps less summer jobs for people. The multipliers, the car multipliers, and some parts of the methodology will still remain because sensors will not be able to count how many people are in the cars. And it will most likely not change the proportion of visitation per agency. And also a big drawback is that it will not include voters anymore. And now the second question about the winter estimate accuracy. We were able and lucky, and also Three Rivers Park District was kind enough to provide data for their winter study. And the winter study was pretty accurate and is very impressive. However, we were only able to relate 17 units. They also counted some other units that are not part of the region, so we were only able to compare 17 units. Again, winter data only accounts for approximately 15% of the total annual use. And we did find that the annual use estimates, the Met Council overestimates visitation in winter use approximately somewhere in between 18 to 20% when compared to Three Rivers Park District totals. However, taking it into annual use estimate, it only accounted for 3.4% of the total annual use, only again, just for those 17 parks. So it's not a big change when you account the annual use estimates total. So what this means for winter visitation is that actually this is something that I was impressed when I found out, is that the methodology that we use to calculate the annual use estimates is a positive, and that 3.4% difference between our counts and theirs. It's actually a positive indicator that our methodology and winter multiplier produce reliable results at the agency level. And also, again, if we want to continue to pursue a more accurate visitation for for winter use, it would most likely have to be a dedicated study outside of the annual use estimates methodology, as the annual use estimates methodology is only for the annual use estimates, and it does not account for anything else that is outside of the annual use estimate methodology. A different methodology would have to be built. However, we will continue to monitor. Especially the Park and Trail Visitor Study. We will also continue to monitor winter and shoulder season visitation, perhaps explore a methodology or a feasibility of a study, and also understanding that perhaps technology and costs evolve. We will continue to monitor about the viability of having sensors for parks and trails. And with that, I'll welcome any questions.
Okay. Questions? Yes, Amanda.
More of a comment, but just appreciate, you looking into a lot of the things that we raised last year. I remember we had a pretty robust discussion about sensors and winter months and stuff. So, I think that was really good on your part to look into that for us. So appreciate that. And just like my editorial comment there, I think, obviously the cost of doing it with the sensors would be significant. It might be helpful to have like a, like what's currently spent to know how much of an increase it is, because obviously there's staff time and everything going into that. But I think at the end of the day, most of us would think that if there was extra money to throw around, we'd probably want it to go to the operations and maintenance, over this. But, definitely appreciate the effort. Thank you.
Anything else? Yes.
I did have, was curious on some of the data points you brought up. Did anyone ever take a look at some of the cause and effect items? So like taxes in a specific area. And I'm gonna pick on an area to draw in my thoughts a little bit more. So there's a place called Cuyuna, Ironton Crosby, right? And so very dying area at one time, and then they have a recreational sport that infused them with a significant amount of tax revenue, right? And they had the same problem where they couldn't figure out like, okay, where do we begin or end with, how do we be able to quantify our numbers? One of the things that I brought up was like, okay, what's your traffic patterns, right? What are the types of purchases? And so what they started noticing, and I'm just completely making up some of the data points, but using it as a reference, you know, you got bike tires, bike tubes and things of that nature, that increased, right? And so they were able to take those numbers over a period of time and come up with a trend. And then they looked at their tax revenue and they said, okay, we see similar patterns here. We see increase here during the time of the year and a decrease over here, and guess what? You saw an increase in their tax revenue and a decrease. And then it was brought up for traffic in temperature, right? So temperature also was a driving factor of when people could do X, Y, Z, whatever sport it was, you know, from scuba diving to biking or whatever they wanted to look at. My question, I laid that all out, my question is, has that ever been taken into consideration? Okay, so.
Yes, thank you for the question, Commissioner. Especially weather patterns. I've always, every year I take into consideration as part of me trying to understand the patterns in visitation, why some things went down. But I consider weather, I consider pollution, I consider flooding, I consider heat days, and I found that people tend to go out when it's starting to get warm, but sometimes it gets warm enough for them not to go out anymore. So yes, I do consider all these factors into assessing, especially the reasons why sometimes visitation go up and go down.
I know in his previous presentation, one thing that was mentioned for that dip as a possible influence was the wildfire smoke we had a couple of years ago that had several days of impact over especially weekends that just timed out badly, so.
Yeah, thank you for the point, Chair. And yes, especially in 2024, we also saw a lot of rain. Over half of the counts were scheduled when there were rainy days, and it just both were randoms and they just overlapped, and that decreased visitation parts, which is also something that perhaps as the weather is changing, as more rain might be observed in the future, is also something that I take into consideration when it's visitation.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I do have a technical question because my statistics class was, yesterday pretty much. 10% error, is that a good, window of error, or is too large, or is too small?
I think that would be the end of point that is still acceptable.
Okay.
I would believe that if it goes beyond the 10%, I would be hesitant into delivering results that might influence policy or management of parks.
Okay.
That's why we do this at not a unit level, but at agency and a regional level, and that's why if we want to pursue more statistical accurate data, it would have to be an investment, regardless of how it's done.
And on that, some things that I'm wondering about is, while it would be awesome to have statistically significant data on every unit, it looks like that's very expensive. Would it be more feasible if we wanted to kind of spot check certain units periodically? I'm thinking you could either do some things of, you get some data on all the units, but do it on a rotating basis, so maybe each one gets something every 10 years and you're only doing 10% of it each time, or potentially something to look at, like I know one of the things we've talked about before is with the equity grant program, could we see something that has, a year or two before that, and then come back and check it 4 years after the thing is built or implemented or started or whatever it is, and get any sort of a valid comparison between those two, just to know, did this project seem to do something?
So the methodology for the annual use estimates, unfortunately, does not lend itself to that spot checking, and that is because we have a 3-year average, and if there's a high number of counts in a specific park or trail that might influence not only the previous, that year, but also the next 3 years or 4 years after that, just because we carry that. So we do a big sampling the first time a park or a trail is open, just because we don't have those previous 3 years. And then we do a big sampling. But yeah, unfortunately, I think it's a good idea, but it would have to live outside of the annual use estimates.
So then the question with that sort of thing is, if it has to be some different methodology, the analysis bits are your stuff, but the big expenses are the people actually out doing counts. So how much can we repurpose the same count data or ask them, while you're out here, fill in 2 more boxes kind of a thing, so that we don't have to increase the expense of conducting the counts that much, but then increase the time processing it to give us something else. Is that more feasible?
So if I'm understanding correctly, it would be perhaps getting more into depth on the data that I'm getting from the agencies. Instead of the burden relying on the agencies, perhaps you can rely more into the data analyzing. Is that what I'm?
Yeah, potentially something like that, or like for your particular example, like, okay, one thing has a 3-year average. But you could design something that doesn't have a 3-year average and have a separate calculation in, a different spreadsheet that has the same source data, right?
Yeah, it's certainly possible. Something that is something that I can bring up with the regional park implementing agencies to see because again, the burden of doing the accounts fall into the agencies,
Right.
and they pay their staff to get the annual use estimates. If they are interested, this is something that it will perhaps not require that much of my time, and we already have a system, so that's certainly a possibility, and I can bring that up with the agencies to see their opinion. The only thing that I think that is that it might require more their staff time, the implementing agency staff time, and so that's the only caveat with that.
Yeah, some of this is going to them and saying, okay, if we know we can't do all of the things, is there something relatively small in terms of your work that lets us do something useful with other things? Kind of deferring to let the smart people figure that out, because I don't know what ends up being useful or what's feasible. Was that never? Oh, geez. So yeah, like, is it a matter of just adding another couple of questions on the questionnaire that they're already doing, or having a couple more staff people counting so that they can do more entrances at one park each year, or what? I think they kind of know what we're wanting, of just give us more, and we obviously can't get everything we want, so we're wondering, you can tell us what ends up being statistically significant, because mine was a long time ago. But where are the most bang for your buck kinds of improvements of, are there opportunities to do a relatively small investment that gets us something back? And yeah, some of it's on them, but also, if it's something where they don't have to do a whole lot and it's on the council, like, yeah, some of this might be increase your workload, but if it does too much of that, convincing the council to potentially get another staff person working on that is probably easier than asking the implementing agencies to each have 10 more staff people doing something, right? So anything like that, it's an option.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's something that I will explore, and I'm happy to report back when I have information about it.
With the Three Rivers stuff, they have some of what we were bringing up as one of our things to wonder about, which is artificial snowmaking. And for the particular sites they were looking at, did they see any significantly different results in the locations where they do artificial snowmaking versus the rest of them?
Oh, interesting. I do not know, Chair. But that's something that I can send a quick email to them and present back with. But yeah, I do not know. My assumption is that yes, just because people go perhaps to recreate when there's snow. But yeah, I don't have the numbers right now with me, but I can report back.
Some of the things that we've been wondering about in terms of the winter use, first off, just is the multiplier we use in the ballpark overall, but also are there significant differences from unit to unit, which is why we want some more unit data of like, are these kinds getting way more than others? Like, are parks significantly different from trails? Are the large park reserves significantly different from the smaller parks? And then some of it is, what are our trends as what winter is changes with our climate changes? Does that make things different, or do people just kind of change what they're doing? And do things like artificial snow influence that? These multi-year trend lines that also have small stuff for particular units. How much of that can we know?
Thank you, Chair. And yes, and that is something that perhaps the park visitor study might be able to give us some light. Perhaps not fully understand the system, but as soon as that one might be the data that we will get the soonest. Which is basically I can compare how many times people go to that specific park during the winter. And then I can find out if that park provides artificial snow making.
Yeah.
And then I can perhaps correlate how many people tell us that they go to that park during winter, and also see if artificial snow making has a significant amount or it impacts somehow the visitation or what they say they visit.
And this would certainly be totally different kind of methodology and not valid in the same way. But some of this, we might even be able to get useful information by a self-reporting system. Like, could we ask people, fill out a card when you go to our parks and tell us a little bit about what you're doing, which would, I'm sure you're cringing over there because you're saying that's definitely not statistically valid. Fair. But if we've already said we don't have statistically valid data on that kind of subject, are there some things that might still help us figure out some plans from anecdotal data?
Yeah, and I think, Jerry, that might point us or lead us into perhaps inform a little bit more if there's a study, it might help us understand a little bit more what people are doing. So yeah, happy to explore methods and how to gather more accurate, or at least more information about winter use.
Yeah. On the sensors, did I understand right that there's a capital purchase expense and then an ongoing subscription for them?
Yes.
Why? Why does everything need a subscription?
And that is not accounting for the ongoing maintenance if there's vandalism or if there's a broken sensor. That is not accounting for that. So it's just a subscription to those, so there would be an additional cost.
So is it like the data collection?
This is like a licensing
Right.
subscription, and then you have to.
That is correct.
Can we just get some middle schoolers to build us some stuff with Raspberry Pis?
Yeah, I'm curious, that's where I was going. So, I'm curious on, you're doing your data mining, right? I'm derailed a little bit from Parks and Recs over to more technology. So, we need resources to be able to do X, Y, Z. We have a lot of data points, and we're trying to source data where parks, trails, and just regions have their own characteristics. So you're talking about a very large amount of data trying to find a needle in a haystack. So I'm curious, in your present work, are you using an LLM? Are you using an AI to crunch that data for you?
No.
Okay, so derailing, I would say to be able to find unstructured data, because that's what you're looking for, I would highly recommend to the council, to your leadership and whomever, that get a subscription, right? And do a scientific data mining of all possible, well, I wouldn't say all possible data because it's too large, but a certain amount of data from weather to taxes, so things that we just talked about, characteristics of parks, regions, and equate it, give it a number, and then start running the numbers against weather patterns and things and see what would happen. That's the beauty of AI, right? That's a little bit of my background, so that's the reason why I can talk to it a little bit. There's way more smarter people out there that can probably even do better. But my point I'm trying to make is that maybe we can try to create a data model that will get us 50% there, right? So that we can say, hey, we do need to buy this, or we need to take this course of action. And this is tag along from the original, well, the precursor of we have a decrease in funding, right? So the work is actually needed to be able to ensure that we don't go lower than 10%, like the number was given. And so it's important, this is a really important conversation, right? That we should crack the nut on pretty well, so. I'd be willing to actually even throw my head into the help, so definitely.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, we've been looking into some LLMs. We're still a little bit wary when we're crunching, especially for the annual use estimates that the funding formulas depend on it. Perhaps we would have to estimate the how many times perhaps the LLM might hallucinate some of the numbers.
Right.
And perhaps to account for that, especially for something that could have like implications for the funding formula. But for make other things, some other studies, I think that it could be proven useful, especially for winter use. Data mining, perhaps we also been looking into perhaps gathering information from Instagram or Snapchat or other social medias. We had an idea previously, streetlight, we were thinking about using streetlight. However, due to changing policies of streetlight and phone privacy problems, that was dropped. However, this will only, yes, and there's benefits and drawbacks, especially for social media. We will only be targeting park users that have those apps. But some communities might, some other communities might not. But yeah, that's definitely an interesting idea, and yeah, I'll be happy to do more about this for sure. Absolutely.
I think there's definitely kind of two buckets of stuff that we're crossing over between here. One being the stuff that has to be solid, hard data because it's forming things like funding formulas and graphs that have to be consistent over time and that kind of stuff. So in terms of like the actual number of the annual use assessment, we have the questions about winter and stuff to know whether changes are needed to that, but until we have the answers to that, yeah, we don't want to mess that up. And then there's other stuff that we want, not so much as it changes a number, but for us to talk about in more information items of, should we be doing anything differently? Is anything need to go into a different policy? Do we need to try to do something different with money? That kind of stuff, which is much more wishy-washy and has some more flexibility because of it. So, yeah, I think you're asking for some stuff that goes a lot into that second category of what can we know from all the things, which is different from, yeah, make sure we don't mess up the annual use estimate number. But yeah. And I know we do also have some, low-hanging fruit there in terms of comparing to other data, because we had, Kenny here talking about some of the numbers the state has in terms of there's your heating degree days, cooling degree days, and I don't know, what do you call kind of his made up, like, how nice is it outside index thing? And that's a state office, and we have some of that available we can compare to. So it's like you've been doing that anecdotally to say, here's what I can talk about to people. But I wonder, like, in terms of actual lines next to each other, whether there's anything in there that means anything to the rest of us.
Yeah, I've been able to compare specifically weather data with the annual use estimates for going back 10 years, and there's some patterns that are very noticeable and visible. Weather patterns and heat are the top ones, right?
And some of that comes up, I'm thinking the last time we updated the park policy plan, some of the initial presentations we got were from the demographer and some other people that were trying to do the forecasting stuff, that chapter 1 of we think some things might look like this, and some of that included weather changes and population changes and where they might be. And so knowing anything we know about how visits tie into those things, so that if they tell us, yeah, the population's gonna shift into or out of the urban cores and temperatures are gonna do this and rain's gonna do this, what does that mean for a prediction of annual use? We've had predictions of annual use, but I don't know how they come up with those. So some of that crosses over. We've measured the past and predict the future, and
Yeah, predicting the future is can be some tricky businesses, but yeah, I'm actually looking into that. I'm currently writing a charter that might help explain some of those patterns.
Okay.
And hopefully in the near future I'll be happy to come back and present.
anything else? Okay. Thank you, oh, no, I have one more question for you. How do we count trail visits where the same person in the same outing might be in multiple implementing agency jurisdictions? Because they, rode their bike 2 miles here and 3 miles there, and it's across a border.
If there's counters and they enter from one part of the trail from an agency to the other one, the person will be counted twice. So one for one agency and the other one for the other one. And that is mainly because the trail is being used and maintained by 2 different agencies.
Yeah.
So the use of the trail will pass on.
In terms of the funding things it's used for, it makes sense to have it
Yes.
counted twice, but there might be other things we care about where it doesn't.
It might not, that's correct.
Okay, good to know. Now I'm done.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, that'll bring us on to our second information item, which is about the equity grant program. Draft of our notice of funding availability, which you'll hear us say NOFA later. That's what it means.
Great afternoon. I wanted to call out that our recording secretary and our director are managing the heat in here. They recognized it was getting hot. They were starting to try to cool it down. I don't know how you control it, but I've just been watching the temperature.
It's coming back down.
Yeah, amazing. So thank you. Sorry about that, it was hot.
Were you trying
I
to
thought
stress
you were
out?
wanted to feel in Florida, so I was wondering.
You're fine.
Monica's happy, the rest of us are fine.
Yeah.
Alright, thank you, Chair, Commissioners. I'm here to talk about the 2027 Competitive Equity Grant Program draft notice funding availability. For the record, my name is Jessica Lee, I'm of Planning Parks. I'm going to start with some background for those of you that are newer to the Commission. The Equity Grant Program purpose is to provide funding to the implementing agencies for projects to advance equitable use of the regional parks and trail system. We focus on 6 different areas: race, ethnicity, income, ability, age, and national origin. And we do encourage agencies to consider multiple areas when they can. The Equity Grant Program started in 2019 with a pilot program. The Thrive 2040, which was our previous regional development guide, committed the council to strengthening equitable use of the parks and trail system. And to honor that commitment, the council set aside $300,000 in council bonds. Because they were council bonds, we could only do capital projects that first time. We received 14 applications for $1.5 million, and we were able to fund 3 of them. So this demonstrated a great need for more funding and for continuation of this program. So in 2021, we had our first full grant round. And the council decided to use the interest earnings, the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, to help fund equity grant programs. So we had a mix of interest earnings and capital council bond funds. So that year, in 2021, we were able to fund 23 out of 37 projects for mixed capital programming. And in 2024, we had a similar funding structure, and we funded 22 projects, which was all of the eligible applications we received, which was great, but also we want to keep it a competitive program. Here's a list of previously funded projects to give you kind of an idea of the range of things that we can fund with this program. So St. Paul's BIPOC Ambassador Program, Scott County's Mental Health and Nature-Based Wellness Program, which has been funded twice and has been so successful that they're looking for ways to continue funding that. Minneapolis Bike Skills Park along the Minnehaha Parkway Regional Trail. Ramsey County's new two courts at Keller Regional Park, which was also funded with Legacy, but partly with equity. Three Rivers has a growing water safety education program. Washington County is currently conducting an American Indian historical cultural study. Dakota County created a very interactive creative Unity Trail loop at the Mississippi River Greenway Regional Trail. Anoka County is working with Adaptive Equipment Solutions, and Carver County previously received funding to update their ADA assessment. So that brings us to the 2027 grant round, which is very exciting this year. We have $8 million, much more than we had in the past. And this is just due to an increase in those interest earnings. So we have $1 million in council bonds, which is that 3 years worth that we've been building up. And then we have $7 million in interest earnings. So we're still gonna prioritize programming like we've done in the past. So we would fund those first, and then what's left we'll use for capital. And to encourage big creative ideas for capital projects, we decided to increase the maximum to 1 million this year. So we're hoping for a really competitive program. Here's our scoring criteria from the NOFA, and this is in the last page of the attachment if it helps to look at it there. We have 5 main categories, and each one has equal weight. The first one is impact on equitable use, which is identifying one or more underserved populations the project will benefit and why they were chosen, along with identifying measurable equity outcomes. The second category is community partnerships, so demonstrating community involvement throughout the project, both by developing new relationships and strengthening existing partnerships, and showing how those will continue after the grant period. The third is community engagement, and the proposal demonstrates how partners and underserved populations will be engaged throughout the project and after the grant period. It also includes Parks and Trail System awareness building among those underserved communities. The fourth is capacity building, and this will help to increase the ability of the agency and their partners to grow their skills in working with underserved communities and demonstrating how they can leverage the council's funds. This could be through cash match, in-kind match, matching grants. There is no required match for this program. And the final category is programming initiatives. So we really encourage the planners and directors of the agencies to work with our outreach staff and develop the proposals with the outreach and education staff. And so even with our capital projects, we encourage a lot of programming efforts alongside those and community engagement and outreach. And so you'll see in this criteria, there's a lot of community partnerships and community engagement and programming. So our anticipated timeline, I'm hoping to bring the final NOFA back to you in September. And we would get the NOFA posted by the beginning of October and open our application in Flux, which is our new grant software. And this would give the agencies 3 full months to apply. Applications being due on December 30th. This allows the council to have the month of January to do internal review and gather materials to get everything ready for the technical review team to meet in February. And they will develop those funding recommendations to bring to the council in April to get our grant agreements out in May. And I did want to just mention that our technical review team is made up of Parks Commission members, our Community Development Committee members, and our park agencies. So we are looking for 3 people from this commission to volunteer on that team. And I would just ask if you're interested to please talk to the chair, who will make the final appointments on that. And that's all I've got. I'm happy to take questions.
On that membership point, does the council still have a separate equity committee as well? And are we interested in involving anyone from that?
Chair, Commissioners, we have not had a lot of success with that in the past. We can certainly reach out to them again.
Okay, so it's not that there was any sort of decision not to, it's just because we haven't gotten feedback from them before.
Correct.
Which I do remember, so, okay. Just want to make sure we ask the question. And then in terms of people from agencies, how are we, in the first couple of years, we had small enough amounts of money that not all of the agencies were even applying. Now that they probably all will, how are we handling the conflict of interest that those people have and getting that worked out in a way that doesn't mess up our scoring?
Yeah, sure, Chair, Commissioners. We do have a conflict of interest policy. So each member of the review team will sign it and they'll list any projects they have a conflict with, and they will just not score those.
Okay, so we're just dropping one of them and averaging things with a fewer number.
Yes.
Questions, commissioners? Yes, Betty?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at the scoring criteria, I don't know if it's just the wording is very agency-centered, but I kind of feel like we're missing, have these groups that are supposedly going to be helped by this actually said they want this, you know? If that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm kind of thinking there's similar wording in the guidelines for Boy Scout Eagle projects of you basically should be being approached by the benefiting organization rather than you going to them and saying, I'd like to do this. You can go to them and say, is there anything that would be useful to you? But if it is a community partnership thing, a lot of that should be sourced from that. And do we have any way of rewarding that rather than the park agencies might say, yeah, this would probably be interesting to this group, let's call them. But we might be looking for a little bit more of the approach some of these other groups and say, what do you think would help? And have that spur some thoughts. Which is, difficult to start doing within the timeline of this, but we know that they have ongoing relationships, so let's just come up and the past long-range plan engagements and things like that, and so that they're, I think what Wendy's getting at is try to word this in a way that they know when they submit their application that they should kind of explain where the ideas came from and how.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner. That's a good point.
Anything else? I had two, you mentioned the dollar amount range for individual grants. Is there any maximum that a single agency could get?
Well, Chair, Commissioners, they're allowed to, we're proposing they'll be allowed to apply for 4 proposals. We will still strive for geographical distribution. So we're not setting a max an agency can receive, but I think it's understood that they're probably not going to get 4 million.
Okay.
But we do want to encourage it to be more competitive this time.
So we're not setting that as a separate number, but just kind of thinking that the rest of it balances that out.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the next question you dive right into is, with this statement that the council will seek to maintain geographic balance, how are we accomplishing that when it's not an item on the scoring criteria?
Chair, Commissioners, I think ultimately that will come down to the review team. So in the past, maybe in 2021 when it was more competitive, we would look through the scoring, and if there were 2 that were very similar, but one agency had already received a grant and one hadn't, then maybe we would decide that one would get it despite the score maybe being 1 point less or something.
Okay. So we're acknowledging that these scores are informative, but we're not just automatically awarding in order of score.
Correct.
Okay.
if you volunteer to be on the review committee, you can, it's more art than science, Tony. So-
Right. Yeah, we've had things a little bit different each year depending on how much money we had and what kind of things came in. And yeah.
That's a good point.
And I just want to mention to the other commissioners, part of what Emmett and I talked about earlier today is I was a little concerned about with the larger amount of money, if this was going to be a surprise to agencies, and he assures me, no, they've been talking to them for several months about what's coming, and they're not going to find out that when we publish the minutes from tonight, so it's fine.
Jessica's done a great job, I'll just say, getting out, talking to individual agencies. We hosted a really interactive and positive like collaboration where every agency was there in Anoka. We did it in Anoka County at Bunker Hills, and that was 7 or 8 months ago.
Yeah, last fall.
Okay, so.
Anything else? All right, thank you, Jessica, we'll look forward to seeing you again in probably September. Okay. That'll bring us on to our last information item. Yeah, I'll figure out how to do that, I think, after this. Well, yeah, we'll start out with our staff presentation and then come back to some things.
All right, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Council Member, Commissioners. I'm Colin Kelly, Planning Analyst, and I'm here today with Steve Elmer, Planning Analyst in Metropolitan Transportation Services. Today, Steve will be sharing a presentation with you on the Midtown Greenway Trail Expansion Planning Study, while my colleague Zoe Mock and I played a role on the project management team and the technical working group. Steve here served as the project manager and has in-depth knowledge of the planning process and the planning study. I should note that the technical working group also included representatives from Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board and the City of St. Paul, whose jurisdictions overlap the study area, among many others. Steve will talk more about the technical working group in his presentation. We are bringing this information item to you because of the connections to the regional parks and trails system, including the Midtown Greenway Regional Trail, Mississippi Gorge Regional Park, the planned Grand Rounds Missing Link Regional Trail, and the Mississippi Gorge to Samuel Morgan Regional Trail Search Corridor in St. Paul. Since some of you may not know Steve, I want to quickly mention that after 17 years of working for the Met Council and 37 years in the transportation planning field, Steve will be retiring next week.
Wow.
The Council Parks and Trails team is grateful for the many opportunities we've had to collaborate with Steve and wish him well in the next chapter. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Steve.
Okay. So rolling heavily today, it's your last chance.
Last big presentation, I think. Hopefully you can hear me okay. And would you mind forwarding when I'm here, because I'm gonna kind of use my notes here. Yeah, thank you for the nice intro, kind words, Colin. So, you can go to the first slide. Okay. So I want to acknowledge, before I get into the details, the work of our consultant team, which was led by Kinley Horn and Associates, with support from Michael Baker International, which was our railroad and bridge expert consultant, and with support from Transportation Collaborative and consultants here in Minneapolis. And they did an excellent job of carrying this study of nearly 1.5 years in process, and I just wanted to thank them publicly for their hard work on this study. Okay, next slide, thank you. So I'll start with a little bit of background. We had 2 purposes of this Midtown Greenway Trail Expansion Planning Study. One was to develop a conceptual implementation plan to extend the Greenway from its eastern terminus in Minneapolis in a way that provides for a new and efficient transportation connection between the Twin Cities, as well as a premier recreational opportunity for all the region's residents. And secondly, to advance alignment concepts into project development. Back in 2023, that state legislature passed their Omnibus Transportation Finance Bill, which directed us at Met Council to plan a continuous and dedicated bike pedestrian trail from the current eastern terminus of the Midtown Greenway. You can actually flip to the next slide because it has a map. And I realized because I'm not connected, I can't point to anything, but I will be as descriptive as possible. And you can see on this slide, the dark green on the left-hand portion of the alignment there is the existing Midtown Greenway. And so beginning from the eastern terminus on the west bank of Mississippi River there, this would cross the Mississippi River, preferably along the short line rail bridge, the existing active freight rail bridge, and then following along the rail corridor all the way into St. Paul and over to Allianz Soccer Field in St. Paul. They also directed us to include a trail spur connection that you see there going from southeast to northwest from the main route to within a few blocks of the University of Minnesota main campus and terminating at 27th Avenue Southeast, which is also the route of the planned Grand Rounds Missing Link Regional Trail. Okay, and yes, next slide, please. Yeah, and so this is just a zoomed in version of the previous map showing our study planning corridor, showing the on-rail corridor segments in green, and then off-rail parallel or extended segments in magenta. And anything else on that? This also shows our connections to existing and planned local bikeways and regional trails on this map. Next slide, please. So for study engagement, we began early in the study and convened a technical work group of the government agencies that have the most connection to this Midtown Greenway project, potential implementers, and they were really our expert sounding board throughout the course of the study. They advised us, the study team, on technical issues and process considerations. And the group consisted of staff from each of the agencies listed there, and some of these agencies had multiple representatives representing different departments within their agency. Next slide. During the course of the study, we met with neighborhood groups, community organizations, as well as government agencies, and we met multiple times with council, neighborhood councils and district council, as well as special presentations at Minneapolis Bike Advisory Committee, St. Paul Transportation Committee, and the Hennepin County and Ramsey County Active Transportation Committees. And we met several times with Midtown Greenway Coalition, Sierra Club, and Friends of the Mississippi River. Met 3 times with the National Park Service during the course of the study, and had communications with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Coast Guard, which have review responsibilities when this project would go into environmental review. Next slide, please. As well as that, we also had 3 pop-up events during the spring summer of last year, and one of them on the existing Midtown Greenway Trail in June. We also established a study webpage to inform public stakeholders as well as request feedback on preliminary corridor alternatives. Next slide, please. And so now I want to get more into the details on this. So we did define 3 specific alignment alternatives for the purposes of evaluating and comparing options through this study. And before I get into those definitions, I just wanted to note that the scope for the study intended the consultant to get us to what is known as the 10% design level. So these alignments are very preliminary, only at 10%. And they could very well evolve with further discussions and public process in the environmental review and design phases forthcoming. So beginning with alignment alternative 1, that's using the short line bridge as a rail plus trail shared scenario and would follow primarily along the on-rail corridor. But it would be wherever we could achieve a minimum offset of at least 25 feet between track and edge of the trail corridor. And so that is an industry standard for rail with trail type projects. And this alignment was meant to mimic the definition described in the state legislation. Alignment alternative 2, which would be a contingency to alternative 1, would partially use the rail corridor wherever we could achieve a minimum of 50 feet track center offsets, separation between trail and track. And this would require a new Mississippi River trail only bridge to be built adjacent to the existing rail bridge. And then alternative 3, which would be a contingency to alternatives 1 or alternative 2, would also require a new trail only bridge, but it would be located entirely outside of the Canadian Pacific Kansas City right-of-way, and therefore would be independent of any railroad negotiations or approval. Okay, excellent. And so on the map here, we show the full corridor trail alignment alternatives. It's a little complex here because we have overlapping alternatives, but I'll do my best here. The orange line you see, that is the alternative 1, follows the short line rail bridge and nearly entirely on the rail corridor. As far east as Cleveland Avenue. And then alternatives 1 and 2 cross the bridge parallel there. Would have to be the same location, same placement of a new bridge across the river. And then 2 and 3 kind of diverge. 2 follows more closely to the rail corridor with the dashed line. And red is alternative 3, entirely outside of the rail corridor. And continuing on, basically street right-of-way along St. Anthony Avenue, all the way to Cleveland Avenue, and then up to the intersection of Gilbert Street, which is on the north side of I-94, where we have a yellow segment there. From that Gilbert Street, Cleveland Avenue intersection, all the alternatives are the same. They're all off the rail corridor and they're along city streets. And that's great for the overall map. Next slide, please. And I do have these more detailed trail crossing layout concepts. I'm not going to get into too much detail with these. We can come back to these if there are specific questions. But I did want to mention this slide in particular, kind of showing the parallel bridge alternatives for alternatives 2 and 3, and alternative 1, the short line rail bridge in orange. And then, so red continues on from that bridge crossing, which is shared by 2 and 3. And it shows kind of a circular down ramp, or a helix down ramp, to touch down on St. Anthony Avenue, and then follows the street right-of-way straight up and moving to the east and into St. Paul. All 3 alternatives would connect. You can kind of see the green line that shows all 3 alternatives. There's a down ramp from any of the ramps, any of the bridges that goes directly down to East Mississippi River Parkway and connects to the Mississippi River Regional Trail adjacent to that roadway. And yeah, next slide. And then this slide, just briefly, so we show what we call the Prospect Park connector, that spurred trail that we talked about in the broader slide, is known as the Prospect Park Connector in our study. That's shown in brown there, kind of going off from the main route. That connection would be mainly through CPKC right-of-way. There's a pinch point that you see in red where, and I'm gonna talk a little bit, I can talk a little bit more on that in a slide coming up actually. And then this shows the need for an underpass of the existing freight rail track, and that's a requirement of the railroad as well. They don't want to have to manage people crossing at grade. So that's that slide. Next slide very quickly is the northwest end of that Prospect Park connector. You can see it's parallel and mostly within railroad right-of-way, parallel to their existing rail yard tracks that run adjacent to I-94. It crosses Franklin Avenue at grade and then continues to the north. North of Franklin, the tracks have been pulled up, I believe, for the most part. It's been abandoned, and so that's totally available. There is an old rail girder bridge that is shown there crossing I-94. That would have to be rehabbed for trail use. And then it connects through what is being planned as an expansion of Luxton Park by NPRB, the Minneapolis Park Board, and the terminus there at 27th Avenue Southeast. Next slide. So I'm not going to say much about this one, but you can see how the three alternatives diverge just west of that's Pelham Boulevard. All three would have a connection. This was actually described in the legislation, would have a connection to get you to at-grade connection to the Pelham Boulevard existing bikeway. And then alternative 1 is in orange along the rail corridor. Alternative 2 would require a new bridge across 94, trail-only bridge. It runs underneath Pelham Boulevard, then runs across 94 and runs adjacent to the rail corridor along that stretch. And then alternative 3 just keeps going on St. Anthony Avenue to the east. Okay, next. And basically here, they just keep going east until they hit Cleveland, and then they alternative 3 in red there, south of the freeway, turns to the north on Cleveland, would use probably one-way bikeways on either side to connect to the rest of the trail alignment, which is identical from that intersection at Gilbert Street and Cleveland Avenue, where the circle is, saying something about crossing improvements, I believe. So that would be the connection. All three are the same from that point on, following City Street rights of way along Gilbert Street, Pryor Avenue, St. Anthony Avenue, next slide, to the east along St. Anthony, where the city has already installed an existing separated bikeway. It's one way for the first part of that stretch along St. Anthony Avenue. That would be upgraded somehow and becomes two-way just before the overpass of Fairview Avenue. Moves to the east and connects to the existing ped bike bridge at Aldine Street. So this is all three alignments. All three alignments do this. This is the same for all three. Next slide, please. And then finally, the last slide for these layouts showing the connection along the relatively wider right-of-way at Pierce Street, or to Pierce Avenue, I forget. Pierce Street, and then runs east along Shields Avenue, which is already in the city's bicycle plan, and then crosses at the existing light at Snelling Avenue to reach the property of Allianz Field. So that's sort of how the layout goes, and if there are questions, we can come back to these for any specific segment you might wonder about. Next slide, please. And so a big part of this study was to coordinate with the Canadian Pacific Kansas City Railway. So we had meetings early, middle, and late with them and communications. And through early discussions with the railroad, with that knowledge in hand, we developed a proposal letter that we as that council sent to the railroad on behalf of the study team, and we included preliminary trail layouts. That was delivered in October. We gave them a few months to review and comment on those. We asked for very specific details on what they could live with, what they could would approve and what they would not approve, and what they could live with further, possibly with further discussion. They came back 2 months later in December with a written response, and we had two key takeaways from that response. The first is that construction of a trail on the existing short line bridge would not be permitted. Their reasons for not granting access are given there, mainly safety, and with safety and the risk of accidents and injuries comes liability, that they don't want to carry additional liability for anything like that. And even with the tall and robust fence that was part of the proposal, that they were not comfortable accepting that liability. And they also cited their need to preserve their ability to expand the capacity of the corridor to serve any potential future business development that might happen west of the river. And so that would take up the vacant space on the bridge where we desire to have a trail. So that was a big takeaway from that response. The second takeaway was that the track-to-trail separations or offsets would need to be at least 50 feet, as we had anticipated from early discussions. That would be required between track and trail with no exceptions for any trail alignments that were to be run along and within the railroad's right-of-way. And so what that means for alignment concept 2, it still may be possible with by obtaining some trail easements from the CPKC. However, the 50-foot requirement would limit our availability, our available right-of-way to only a few segments east of the river in Minneapolis. So next slide. So graphically, they're shown here what would be allowed or not allowed, and the allowable segments are shown in green, and where we cannot meet that 50-foot requirement is shown in red. And the Prospect Park connector would be possible. That red portion you see there along the Prospect Park connector is where there's a pinch point in the right-of-way. What would be required there would be negotiating with a handful of private residential property owners to purchase trail easements through the edge of their properties. So with that, you could do Prospect Park connector, and then below that pinch point and connecting to the bridge, that is all within, we have 50 feet plus available within their right-of-way to fit that in. And it could connect to either the existing short line bridge for alternative 1 or to the new proposed trail bridge in alignment 2. So that's how that might work. That gives us a picture of what the railroad is willing to work on or not accept. Next slide. So one big activity that the consultant team worked on was putting together this implementation cost estimate. This is order of magnitude, highly conceptual range of costs. So we're looking at the construction and implementation costs in line items 1 through 5. What was surprising, I think, to a lot of folks, including myself, was the cost to build a new trail bridge across the Mississippi River. At the low end of the range, it was the same as rehabbing the old bridge, basically, $30 million. The ranges for the new bridge are much greater than for alternative 1. The new bridge is alternatives 2 and 3 again. But I would just, to be fair, the engineering bridge consultant, railroad expert, looked at 8 different bridge options for the trail only, the new bridge crossing. And out of those 8 options, 5 were costed at between 30 and 36 million dollars. So very comparable to that range you see for alternative one. Two options were at about 42 million, and then there was only one option that was at 61 million. So that is the high end of that bracket, that range for concepts 2 and 3. So that's costs to get you through construction, open to the public. But on top of that, you may have these additional costs, and 6 is more probable than potential, I would say, as it would look due to current railroad's stance, position that prohibits the use of the rail corridor and the bridge, that is included that is needed for alternative 1 to go through. That would likely require acquisition of the corridor at a very high cost. And we did some estimates, it's in the report, there's a range of costs based on other public acquisitions of rail corridors in recent years. So that was a very high cost. And then for negotiating private trail easements with the railroad for those portions of alternative 2, and with those property owners on the Prospect Park connector, about $1 to $2 million. And then no costs here for alternative 3 because there's no railroad to negotiate with for that alternative. So because of the railroad bridge, short line bridge, there's a cost risk that goes with us. The lower the risk means that the cost estimate is less susceptible to changes, construction cost estimates. So basically, higher level of confidence with low risk, a lower level of confidence with high risk. And so alternative 1 with the short line bridge, we have a lot of unknowns about the condition of the bridge because the railroad would not permit us to do manual inspections on the bridge. And so we don't know exactly what the condition is. They assure us it's in good shape to run freight trains on it, so for a time. And there are other corridor unknowns which are typical of rail industrial corridors, mainly being the potential for contaminated soils. So that's a medium risk. And then no rail-related issues for alternative 3 is a low cost risk. So that cost estimate is we have more confidence in that. Okay, so that's that one. Next slide, please. And then we have this implementation timeline. This is an estimate of the number of years it would take to complete the project. Oh, that's interesting. It doesn't even show up on my screen here.
Can I borrow that?
So by project phase or activity shows the timeline of the 3 alternatives compared. And where you see the real differences are in negotiating with the railroad, 2 to 4 years to acquire the railroad, the railroad right-of-way from this current corridor railroad owner, and to negotiate an agreement with an operating railroad to continue the freight service across the river, as opposed to 1 to 2 years to negotiate easements, and no years for concept alternative 3 outside of the rail corridor. The other difference you see is environmental review, about an extra year for the new Mississippi River Trail crossings due to its management by the National Park Service, and they have some constraints on what could or could not be allowed. And yeah, those are the main differences I see. Design's a little bit longer for with the new bridge, that makes sense. And so overall, it looks like concept alternative 3 could be the shortest timeline to implementation at 9 to 15 years. And then alternative 1, short line bridge, rail corridor versus alternative 2 is pretty close, almost the same. So not a huge difference there, as you can see. And they have longer durations for different phases of the project. Actually, the next slide is for those that are more graphically inclined, shows you kind of the bar chart histogram of the timeline for alternative 1, 2, and 3, and you can see, relatively speaking, how much shorter alternative 3 could be compared to alternatives 1 and 2 by each of the project phases and activities shown in the T there spelled out. Okay, 2 more slides, I believe. Next slide. Thank you. So we have a series of study conclusions here from the study. First conclusion is that all 3 of the alignment alternative concepts were deemed to be technically feasible, but they each have their own unique and significant challenges for implementation. The second one, construction of the trail on the existing short line bridge will not be allowed by the current railroad owner, being CPKC. Number 3, corridor alternative 1 along the short line bridge could be possible through negotiated easements with a future railroad owner or through negotiated outcomes, including purchase of the rail corridor from the current owner, CPKC. Not saying that that is likely possible, but theoretically at least it's possible to do that. The study does acknowledge that things can change. There are things we can't predict and shouldn't try to predict, but it acknowledges the possibility that the current railroad could change for unanticipated reasons. So they could sell it off to a different railroad or merge with a different railroad. And or the remaining rail-dependent businesses west of the Mississippi River could, and I would say unexpectedly, they could move their operations, possibly for technical reasons. They might be limited where they are. Or they could completely dissolve those businesses. These are large grain businesses, terminal operators. One of them is General Mills, the other is ATM. They're both large corporations, so that's maybe not that likely. But it would probably take a serious economic downturn for them to even consider that possibility. Number 5, each government entity that could be a potential partner in implementing the trail, they'll need to assess their own potential cost and risk for their anticipated level of participation across each of the corridor alternatives. And then finally, the study recommends that all 3 alternatives in their present form or as could be modified during preliminary engineering post-study should be carried into environmental review and use that environmental review process to ultimately select the most appropriate preferred alternative for implementation. So those are the conclusions. One last slide is on key steps for implementation. The first big step would be determining an intergovernmental approach. And one idea was to form an implementation work group to continue the discussions between agencies. And then through that group or a different group, formal or informal, determine who would be the lead government agency for different phases of project implementation, as well as secondary or support government agencies for each of those phases. Second step would be to negotiate with CPKC for possible corridor acquisition, if there would be a public agency willing to take that on for alternative 1, or to negotiate permanent easements for alternative 2. And then we need to find a lead agency to sponsor the environmental review process, hire the consultant, and carry the study through, or the review process through, to evaluate the 3 corridor alignment alternatives. And then during that time, usually you run parallel preliminary engineering with that environmental review process, and there would be continued public outreach and engagement during that design process. Then you would typically complete final engineering design after environmental review is completed, and you have, at the end of that analysis and process, you have a record of decision, an ROD. that would describe the preferred alternative and if there are any mitigation actions that need to be taken for implementation. And then finally, depending on what segment is implemented by which government agency, there will be a need to update or amend local bicycle plans as well as regional park and regional trail plans with various segments and phases of the study. So that's my last slide. That's what I wanted to talk about, but I am here to stand for any questions you may have.
Okay. Who wants to go first? Yes, David.
I'll just say this is looks like a pile of work and probably consumed a great deal of time. So thank you for sharing. I guess my questions on this are, what is the projected traffic on any of these proposed routes? Is there any information on that? Like, is it kind of at the level of the grand rounds, or something that's maybe a little bit, 50% of that or whatever? Is there any indication of that? And then secondarily, a question on how busy the rail system is during the day.
How busy the what?
The rail system is. Or is it not?
Oh, the existing corridor?
Yeah.
I'll answer that first, Mr. Chair, it's okay. Thank you for the question. We actually have cameras out there recording train movements, and we also talk to the operating railroad. So there are, on average, 2 train movements per day, and mainly servicing those 2 major grain terminals along Hiawatha Avenue in Minneapolis. And there's a few smaller, occasional served businesses on that side of the river as well. In terms of your first question, so the quality of the trail was pretty much defined in the state legislation that it would be a separated trail, not, wherever possible, and realizing there could be some pinch points or whatever, but kind of high level design, high level facility, similar to what you would see with the regional trail. And I would say regarding regional trails, different segments could be implemented either as a regional trail by the parks implementing agencies, those being Minneapolis Park Board and St. Paul Parks and Recreation Department, or they could be implemented by transportation departments, public works, as street projects and as part of street improvement projects. So either of those have potential, and that kind of differs from segment to segment. So that's sort of what they're thinking.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner, I'd also remind us of Ismail's presentation as well, where he suggested, I believe, that the Midtown Greenway had some 1.4 million estimated visits over the last year. And so were this trail corridor to be extended across the river, we might expect something like that, if not a little bit more potentially going forward. So,
It seems like it'd be a combination of both recreational and people commuting, right?
Yeah.
most likely, yeah.
Many of the trails in this area fit that description too.
Right.
What else? Yes, Amanda.
I just had one question, and maybe I just missed something, but in the alternative 3, like as you go through the projections for right-of-way acquisition or easements, since that's completely off of the railroad right-of-way, I mean, wouldn't there be costs for acquisition of the private property, or?
I have trouble hearing you, could you speak up?
I'm just wondering why there is no cost for a right-of-way acquisition for alternative 3 if it's completely off of the railroad right-of-way?
Because, well, I can answer that, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair. If it's in the street right-of-way, then it's public property, so it's
Oh,
owned
so
by the
it's-
city. It does go through a local park near the river, a very small park that's owned and managed by Minneapolis Park Board, small local park. But it's all public.
Okay, I was,
Yep.
I didn't realize there was no private property contemplated, thank you.
Good question.
Anything else? Alright, I have some stuff. And the first thing is, obviously, this is just a strange departure from the stuff we usually see in both process and who would operate and things like that. So in terms of doing the planning, like, you've obviously gotten this far, but it is different than development of park and trail plans. So in terms of something coming to us, like, do you actually feel like you have the right resources to do that kind of stuff all the way through, where, you know, normally an implementing agency is doing that, you're working with them, but Met Council is tasked with doing it. Do you actually feel okay about that, or is this?
So I would beg to differ a little bit there. We're not tasked with doing it. So we were tasked with doing the study and we've done that. So we are not an implementing agency. We don't
Yeah.
build trails, as you know, unless they're tied to a major transit project, light rail project, where we have to move an existing trail, like in the case of the Blue Line extension, or the trail along Hiawatha for the Blue Line, Green Line extension, sorry, and the Blue Line. There's a trail there that was developed as part of that project.
I mean, what I'm getting at is not saying responsible for building it, but what I'm seeing, you know, this first sentence is the Met Council must plan. And so in my head, I'm thinking of a trail unit long-range plan like we would approve from any of the IAs. Do you think that that sentence in the legislation means that, or does it mean this level of study, and if it was going to be a regional trail, somebody else would pick up from there and do that?
I'll go.
They're saying yes, please.
Maybe not a good idea. No, that is a great question, and the bridge is actually entirely in Minneapolis, and so both the east and west sides. So technically, Colin, do you remember, was the bridge in the Midtown Greenway long-range plan? I mean, I remember there were a lot of caveats that said, you know, we aren't gonna own and operate this, but it was recognized to be a critical link.
It's a dashed line.
Okay.
It was mentioned
it's
in
a
the
dash
presentation we had
Yeah.
earlier this year.
Right, right. That's what I was trying to come up with. The other thing that Steve said is that one of the conclusions and next steps is to form an intergovernmental agency approach. And I did sit in on a number of these meetings. And Steve, when you completed your last presentation, and you've got the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board there, the city of Minneapolis, Hennepin County, Ramsey County, City of St. Paul, and so forth, I think everyone was waiting for, okay, who's gonna jump first? Who's gonna say, I'm gonna, and I don't think anybody jumped, but what I think Steve has helped set up, Steve and the team, was that there's a plan now that exists that provides a path forward for this. And my reading through the tea leaves is that it isn't gonna be any single entity that's going to carry this forward. It's gonna be a collection of agencies. And Steve, you know a lot more about this than I do, but I just thought that was worth saying.
Right. So if it is implemented as a regional trail in Minneapolis or in St. Paul, then it would be more typical to the long-range planning process that you're used to seeing. And then if it's done by the Transportation Agency, Public Works, less so. If we plan as a local trail for those elements, those segments. So a little bit different process. We did have a phasing plan in the report that suggested a way or just one option, and there's many ways you can do this for phasing certain, low-hanging fruit, if you will, segments that could go first and would have immediate utility in terms of connections, particularly on the St. Paul side of the river. And so we're hoping the city might look at that and look for ways to kind of implement those first phases, and then maybe get some momentum toward, we still need the bridge connection. And it's like, if you get it sort of built in pieces like that, number one, you're not biting off the whole elephant at one time, you're just managing. So that's sort of how we're thinking about it.
It's a little funky because as a resident and trail user, all of it's interesting. But under this particular hat here, I'm saying if it's done as not a regional trail, not my problem. If it is, how does it fit in that framework? So the other thing I'm concerned about there is, this is all from the legislation, pretty prescriptive about the alignments and things. You've come up with some alternatives. I'll get to this in a moment, not all of which fit the legislation, which is fun. So if an implementing agency did come to us later with hey, this is what we would do, I'm not entirely sure that all of it would meet our normal process requirements in terms of things like community engagement and studies of potential alignments. If they were told by somebody else, do this alignment, then how do they plan what the best alignment is? So somebody from your area might have to go look through the park policy plan and be like, can they actually meet all of our requirements if they have so much pre-written for them by somebody else? Because I don't know how that works.
Mr. Chair, I just offer that, of course, is a very fair point. On the east side of the river, predominantly in St. Paul, we've got a regional trail search corridor in place from Mississippi Gorge Regional Park that runs kind of east and then south towards the Samuel Morgan Regional Trail. And so I would say about half of what's been described here could potentially be included in that regional trail in the future. But of course, St. Paul has not planned that corridor yet. And of course, a planning process would ultimately tend to land in a preferred alignment, which of course, you want some agreement with this type of corridor if this were to be the path forward. But that planning process has not yet occurred. So that's something to be determined in the future.
Yeah, some of it's already covered, you mentioned, I can't remember if the thing we heard about the Midtown Greenway or was it Green? It might have been about Grand Rounds. I don't remember if it was a plan amendment or if it was just an information item that we got a few months ago. But in any case, some of this stuff might actually already be included in a process that we've seen, but some of it's not. And I don't know how that works. And similarly in that, don't necessarily expect an answer to this at the moment, but given the strange departure from that, it's a question of what decisions are we actually expected to make? So if there's things where the council is expected to do some planning decisions, but they're not necessarily coming through as regional trail, is this body involved or just Wendy and company? Are we gonna do anything different than our normal thing of just wait for an IA to bring us some stuff? And staff are doing extra things, but do we have to do anything different on this? Figure that out. I don't know that we know that today.
I think it's safe to say we don't know that.
Okay.
But that's currently I think the questions for moving forward are becoming sharpened, but the path forward is clearly not prescribed.
One thing that looks a little bit strange in terms of the public engagement that has happened was looking at the list of things that were included, and we have this whole spur going to the U of M, but I did not see the U on the list of entities. Why is that?
Doesn't use their property, doesn't touch their property.
Okay.
So it just runs to the street.
And it isn't the kind of intent for the campus to be the like end point of it though for that spur? It just seems.
I don't know if certainly they could be included in further design
Okay.
discussions, so.
But
there's plenty. We're probably, if we're doing 10% preliminary engineering design,
Yeah.
we're 10% into the engagement, really, you know?
And what that
So-
endpoint was specified, so it was gonna be there regardless of what they thought, so, okay.
That's sort of how we interpret it.
Okay,
So, yes.
so, the other point of, the actual, for those who don't know, I have the bill up. The wording of this says that the plan must go over that railroad bridge.
Good luck.
So if the railroad is saying, no, it can't, how do we do, like, these other alternatives are the sort of thing that we would see with normal planning. They don't meet the law, so is someone gonna try to amend the law? Or do we just have to wait for the railroad? And if we decide we don't even wanna use the bridge, how, what? Anybody know, or is that, we have no idea yet?
I would say that we don't really know.
Well, I think it said that we must study that, that we
Well-
must include that, and we did. So we did everything the legislation required, and then some.
Oh, yeah, okay, so the plan includes it. It doesn't necessarily say that's the only, okay, yeah. So yeah, it says must plan and the trails to be planned must include the following segments thing over Short Line Bridge.
Yeah.
Okay. This is so backwards.
I have a hypothetical question.
Yes.
If we don't use that bridge, how far away do I need to walk on the Mississippi up or down to cross to the other side? Because I mean, I live in Brooklyn Park.
Yeah.
You either cross Oak 610 or you cross at 94, and if you don't, well, good luck and take a kayak because there's no way to cross the Mississippi. So I don't know. We might need a bridge.
Yeah, I think that comes at the 60% plan. We don't.
If we don't have a bridge, I don't know. I mean, I like the idea. I think, it's a long way, but right now with the World Cup, you have to think about it. The soccer field is really far in the middle of nowhere, so if you have a way to connect it better, it might create, more communication in that area. So I like the trail idea, but without the bridges, well.
Yeah. We don't know. Lisa, you had something?
Yeah, I just had wanted to know if we know much about why what's the background, why this ended up in the legislation, who were the advocates for it, and how that plays into it, because clearly this is an expensive project. I work for an agency that is now in the process of building a $25 million 3-mile trail segment that includes 4 bridges, one over the Minnesota River. So I know that you have to have an advocate for it in order for something like this to happen. If you're gonna make it happen, is where it sounds like maybe Minneapolis and St. Paul are a little indifferent to it right now. And so is there another group that's advocating for it, and how might this thing get carried forward? It's a big project.
We'll get there.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I could answer. Yeah, thanks, Lisa, great questions. So, yeah, I wouldn't say that this has a champion in the government sector right now. It's my understanding that Sierra Club and maybe the Town Greenway Coalition were involved with legislation and advocating for it. And so thank you for that. And what we don't know is the level of commitment from the actual legislators. So I guess that will play out. We're not sure what that level is. And so they could certainly convene a group of policymakers if they wanted to. So there's that, and then relating to policymaker, yeah, I guess you could say the cities are maybe a little indifferent. we had a coordination or a follow-up meeting just last week with these agencies and upper level managers. And I think they all sort of acknowledged that this is a great idea, it's a great concept. But they all kind of had, higher priorities in terms of things in their, in the pipeline that aren't fully funded yet. They're there, so they're not gonna move. And so it would be a few years before they might rise to the level of a higher priority. But they also were open to meeting with their elected officials or one or two who may have interest in the study to kind of inquire about the possibility of having somebody champion it. So that's the first step.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to say that they're necessarily indifferent, but this is probably not their top priority in terms of the projects that they need to get done.
Right.
Amanda?
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I just pulled up the language from the law, and I think you did a masterful job of complying with the law, given the way that it is written, in seriousness, and I don't say this to be flippant, but as someone who lives inside the legislative process, just because a bill is passed, there's a lot of steps before this project becomes a reality. There's a lot of ideas that get written into legislation as something to study. So without contemplating other processes and other interactions with agencies, so all of these points are valid, but I'm sure most of them were not contemplated when this was passed.
Well, and similar to some of our other things, lots of our plans take a long time to implement, so some of this could be if the railroad's saying you can't use the bridge, but as you mentioned, railroad could shut down or be bought out or whatever, so it could be you write the plan and just wait indefinitely for something to change with the railroad, which would be not ideal, but that. Nikita.
Lisa spurred on the thought about champions, and the question is, why would you not involve the university, right? Well, those could be your champions, right? You could look at some kind of economic impact. You could probably do landowners, real estate developers, and say, oh, by the way, environmentalists, we do this, we arrive. And those can all be your champions, all speaking the same language and getting it done, and maybe even also provide some type of funding to build the bridge within the legislative language. But that, I would say that probably would be a great avenue to go down, since there isn't a champion necessarily doing that right now. It'd take some legwork, right? Herding cats, but it would be a potential great group of champions.
I was just gonna ask, the answer to this, in terms of legislative commitment, they said to do a plan, but as far as I can tell, there's $0 committed even for doing the planning, much less any sort of implementation at this stage. Is there any sense of whether someone was thinking there might be something coming for funding, or is that all completely unknown still?
You could speculate one way or the other, I suppose. So I don't want to speculate. When the time is right and things start moving, then you can advocate for funding from the state, be a potential partner there, but also a lot of federal programs for these types of major regional projects across major rivers. There's been trails developed over the Ohio River, old railroad bridges, and other rivers like that. So there's typically, and when you've got such a large project, up to $100 million to implement the whole thing, that's where you really need to look first, and then you get what you can out of local and state, but it would be mostly state and federal, I would imagine.
So there's some plausible options for that, but there weren't murmurings that you're aware of, oh, someone here is prepared to step up for it potentially whenever.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
So the one interesting thing, at least in the experience of my past work life, is that now CP Rail knows that that bridge maybe has a reuse and it all of a sudden went up in value, unfortunately. Some of the stuff we were doing in the city of Savage, that's exactly what happened down there. Because people wanted to reuse the Dan Patch corridor potentially for a trail, and just building through that area, they were making you put bridges back in and or a line that's essentially not used.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else for our planning staff? We do also have some people from an advocacy group. So when you were asking about that, we have some comments that were our thing from our public comment period at the beginning, where people have now arrived and this is the item they wanted to speak on. So I was figuring we could let them do that after we're happy with the presentation from these guys. So is there anything else you want from them before we move to that? Okay. Thank you, and then at this point, we can have our people from the Sierra Club come up and give us like I think I'll have you come to this one actually as they clear out. And, state your name and affiliation for our minutes, and then give us your spiel. Get to like 3 minutes or so.
Sounds good, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Peter Reganis, I'm the Legislative Director for Sierra Club North Star Chapter. We worked with State Senator Dibble, the Transportation Chair, and the city staff on this law, and I'd like to express my appreciation to the Met Council and to Steve Elmer in particular for their work on this. I would just note up front that 2/3 of this project is a rails to trails project, which means it wasn't the Met Council who determined the route, it was the railroad over 100 years ago who determined the bulk of the route. For the 1/3 that is on city streets, the city of St. Paul approved of the wording. When we implement this, we will build on a nationally recognized success story, which was described by the Federal Highway Administration, of all folks, as a crown jewel of bikeways. In the interest of time and to answer some of the questions that have been raised towards the end here, I'm going to skip over how great this project is, the existing project. But I would note that it has been a catalyst for economic development, as well as huge ridership, particularly in the western portion. You see block after block of new apartments and condos. People love living with a front door on the Greenway. The Midtown Greenway was built incrementally, the first 2 segments by converting abandoned rail tracks to trails, the 3rd segment by running the trail parallel to active, albeit little used tracks, used as little as the proposed project. It's already running parallel to a section of the existing Midtown Greenway. The 4th segment was built over a new bridge on Highway 55 specifically constructed for the Midtown Greenway. One of the things that's great about this plan is it wisely anticipates that future progress could also be incremental, as shown on slide 24. While the segments are numbered 1 through 5, it does not assume they need to be built in that order. As also described in the report, the easternmost 3 segments east of Cleveland would not require land or cooperation from the railroad, and those segments would provide valuable east-west connections between existing north-south bike routes and a huge destination, Allianz Field. This is true regardless of how long it takes to complete the whole plan. These projects have substantial independent utility as described in the plan. Bottom line, it's good to have a plan and also an interagency work group working on its implementation. That would facilitate progress and also help ensure we don't miss opportunities like we did 5 years ago when the railroad was asking for the state to subsidize a subsidy to upgrade one of its bridges on the Midtown Greenway specifically at 31st Street, and the state just forked over the money without attaching any conditions related to cooperation on a plan like this because the plan didn't exist and now it does. Unless we believe it's the job of the public sector to automatically subsidize private sector railroads, that was a missed opportunity. Another future opportunity we should not miss, and I think we're now less likely to miss, is whatever happens with I-94, which this trail runs over and is parallel to. We will not regret the Met Council doing the work to develop this plan, nor will we regret putting together an interagency work team as amended. I mentioned before that there's very little rail traffic left on the tracks west of Cleveland, including on the bridge itself. Over time, the number of regular rail customers has dwindled to just one business. And over time, And sooner or later, we will build some version of this. Indeed, except for the bridge itself, people are already using this corridor today, albeit in unofficial ways. Finally, the role of the Met Council as a coordinating body is crucial and likely will remain so because of the unique geography of this. As noted, both ends of the bridge are in Hennepin County, but if you walk another 100 yards, you're in Ramsey. So it could be incorrectly assumed that future beneficiaries are in Ramsey, but you all know that's not how transportation works. We must not allow the unique jurisdictions of local governments to we must have it become an asset, not an impediment. It's wrong to say there are no champions. It's more accurate to say there are too many champions divided among too many jurisdictions. They all want somebody else to pay for it because they have competing priorities. It's not that they don't think this is valuable. In fact, part of what gave genesis to this was Congresswoman McCollum reached out to us and said back when she was in the majority and had power over earmarks to say, why aren't you guys asking for an earmark on this? I can work with the Congresswoman in Minneapolis to make it happen. And it didn't happen fast enough, and the idea for this legislation was born. In reality, many residents of both counties would benefit from the connectivity in both directions which this would provide. So again, thank you to the Met Council for developing this plan. I think we're less likely to miss future opportunities, and thank you also for the opportunity to speak to it. Thank you. Happy to answer questions, by the way, afterwards or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, that'll probably come after we adjourn. He'll be around. Okay, I think that wraps up that item for our official stuff at the moment. And we'll move on to our reports, but certainly you can ask people other questions as you think of them. In terms of my reports, for the next couple of meetings, August, we don't currently have much pending in the way of agenda items that have to happen that month. So we're gonna be looking at whether there's any flexible timing stuff that we should be discussing, potentially as just information items. If you know of something or come up with something, let us know. Otherwise, there's a possibility we may cancel that meeting pending what we find about whether there's something we should be trying to cover with that time. Then in September, we want to just verify that people are available for that because it's the Thursday right before Labor Day. So coming up on the long weekend, it's fine with me, it's probably not a problem, but just wanted to throw that out there if anyone knows, oh yeah, we're gonna take some extra days off and do, a 5-day thing. Let us know.
September 3rd meeting?
Yeah.
Well, I have nothing.
Alright, so we got at least 2 of us.
Yep.
So if there's gonna be any problems with quorum, let us know about that.
Yeah, it should be fine.
Okay, cool. And then, don't need feedback now, but give us any thoughts you have on the use of the iPads and how that works, anything we want
I like it.
potentially different about them. If there's anybody who really would prefer to still get printouts, we could arrange that. We're just thinking that maybe we won't do them for everybody and save a couple of trees. But let us know what you think about that stuff.
I like that I can expand the map so I can read actually what's happening instead of trying to understand.
Yeah.
So typically with the committees that use the iPads, we put 3 copies of each agenda item, minus the PowerPoints on the table, so if you feel like you need to grab one to make notes. I always put enough agendas though, however, that you can grab a paper agenda to jot your questions maybe on your agenda or something as we go through, so that's what we typically do at other
Paper
committees.
agenda, even if we don't have the packet.
Yeah, and we just have like 3 copies of each agenda item for people in the audience or whatever, and saves a ton of copying, a lot of paper, and
Okay, sounds pretty good.
folks are okay with that.
It'll definitely be nice for when we have like some of the maps and diagrams where when they're printed out, we can't actually see, especially if they end up in black and white and you're like, the orange pieces.
Policy plan gets a little funky too, those are.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Was there anything else I was supposed to remember?
You remembered everything.
Okay, cool. Other commissioners, any reports? Okay, and our liaison had to take off already. Anything from staff?
Only to say, we have 2 new parks interns working with us this summer. Ginger Hoffmaster right there. And Belle Furman, who I think was not able to either stay the whole time. So. But it's exciting, it's great to have interns, and hopefully we'll get them up in front of the commission one of these days. Thanks for your time today.
Okay, all right. Thanks for humoring us for a little bit longer than usual, everybody. With that, we can now adjourn. Good night.